Welcome, everyone. My name is Isabelle Lefebvre-Vary, and I am the Executive Director of Fertility Friends Foundation. Fertility Friends Foundation is a Canadian registered charity that offers grants to cover expenses associated with fertility treatments, IVF, including egg and sperm donation, and gestational surrogacy. Tonight, I'm very, very happy to host this new webinar, which is part of our Your Fertility Guide webinar series that we started in January. And I'm especially happy to welcome Reema Kiran. She's the Choice Mom Coach. Maybe some of you already know her and follow her online. She's really a coach trying to help and support women who decide by choice or by circumstance to become moms. I think what touches me, we were talking a bit before you all arrived about this webinar, and I told Reema that as part of her bio and who she is, her identity, she's saying that because no woman needs to go through this process alone, she decided to become a coach from experience. Herself is a mom, a single mom by choice, and she decided to make kind of a life guidance to help other women go through this process. So I'm very, very happy to welcome you, Reema, tonight. Thank you so much for hosting this webinar for us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Isabel. Thanks so much. Thank you guys for joining in today. I'm really excited to take you guys through navigating fertility as a single woman, either by choice or by circumstance. Before we get started, I just wanted to check in with the ladies that have joined. Do you mind messaging in the chat where you are in the journey, whether you are undecided of whether this is a path for you, or you've made the decision but haven't tried, started trying to conceive, or you're trying to conceive, pregnant, already a choice mom. If you don't mind, then I can maybe tailor this a little bit to what you guys, where you guys are in the journey. Purchase your sperm donor and make an embryo in the fall. Okay, thanks, Leanne. Anyone else want to share? Yep. Made the choice to start the process. Haven't tried to conceive yet. Okay, sperm donor. Great. We're going to cover sperm donor, picking the sperm donor, and research stage. Awesome. Okay, so that helps me to kind of take you guys through. Let's get into it. So basically, this webinar is for you if you're contemplating this path, and thinking, is this the right path for you, and need more clarity before making an informed decision, or you've already made the decision and you want to learn more about what to expect on this journey. So that's sort of what we're going to cover. And in terms of what we'll cover today is I'm going to tell you a little bit more about my story and how I got to where I am. What it means to be a single mother by choice or by circumstance. Then we'll go into navigating making the decision, to understanding your fertility options, what to consider when picking your donor, because that can be probably the second biggest decision you'll make on this journey. And then trying to conceive in pregnancy solo, and then just sort of a high level, what I've learned as a solo mom in my first 2 years. Okay. And feel free to ask questions as we go along. Isabel will sort of keep track of the chat for me. Okay, so in terms of my story, I've always known I wanted to be a mom. It's something that I've grown up thinking one day, I'm going to find my partner and I'm going to be a mom. And as the years went on, I started to feel the weight of my biological clock. Once I hit my 30s, I was thinking, okay, next year is going to be the year I meet my partner. Next year is going to be the year. And then 35 hit, and I thought, okay, now it's time to freeze my eggs. And I thought this could help me buy more time to find a partner. And so I mistakenly believe that having a healthy lifestyle would ensure, no vices, no sort of bad habits. I thought I'd have plenty of eggs. Turns out I was wrong. And I went into trying to freeze my eggs twice, and found that I only had, whoops, this one, found I only had two eggs that came out of the egg retrieval. So I did it twice. The first time we canceled, and the second time I switched clinics, and then we got two eggs that were viable that I froze. And at that point, my doctor said we can try again, or you can consider moving forward, trying solo. And to me, it just didn't make sense to wait for a partner and lose my chance at being a mom. And so I had to make the call, and all of these questions kind of came to my head. Can I do this? Am I enough? Will my child be okay without a partner? I had to coach myself through all of these questions because I didn't really feel like there were any resources out there, or that support that I needed. And one of the reasons why I started Choice Mom. And I thought this was really not the way I thought it would be, but this was what being a mom was more important to me than having a partner right now. And I could always find a partner later, but trying to have my own child would be, challenging. And so I expected to get pregnant in my first 3 tries. I was 37 by the time I started doing the IUIs and the IVFs. I did 6 rounds of medicated IUIs, and then we moved on to IVF. I did 1 round of IVF. I got 4 eggs. I unfroze my 2 eggs from the egg freezing. So 6 eggs. We ended up getting 3 embryos, and then none of them passed the PGS testing or the PGT testing. And that moment broke me. I was devastated. I really thought IVF was going to work after the IUIs didn't. And I had to use all my sort of self-development practices to get myself back up. I journaled, breath work, meditation, reframing, affirmations, any coaching technique I had, I sort of brought it forward to move forward. And what I realized at my lowest of lows is that I needed to learn to let go and surrender. And by that, I don't mean like stop trying. What I mean by that is understanding that I can't control the fact that I can't control the outcome. I can't control whether I'm going to get pregnant or not. And changing sort of that mindset really helped me have a much easier sort of time in the next round of IVF. So that would have been my 4th round after doing 2 egg freezings, and then the 4th IVF round. We got 8 eggs, which was my highest yield. And then we came down to 3 embryos, did the PGT testing. 1 failed, 1 was inconclusive, and 1 passed, which led to the birth of my beautiful baby girl. She is the light of my life and my inspiration. And she brings, she is the reason I started Choice Mom Coaching, so that I could help women go through this journey and hopefully not feel as alone as I did on my path. On my path. So that's a bit of my story and background. Moving into, nowadays, the reason why women, single mother by choice is on the rise is that we have choices now. We can have our careers, we can choose to have kids later in life, and we can do so without necessarily relying on a relationship. But knowing that we can do that and actually making the decision, as some of you may experience, is 2 very different things. And the problem is many of us are still sort of finding our way in the dark and in terms of trying to choose this path. There's still a stigma around becoming a single mother by choice. I didn't know any other Indian woman that was a single mother by choice. It was only until I sort of joined Instagram and started sharing my story as Choice Mom Coach that I've met a few, but this is still not necessarily a path chosen in some cultures. And the resources out there, if you've looked on Amazon, there are several outdated books out there, and there's just the clinics are not necessarily equipped to help you make that decision, other than telling you where you are in terms of your reproductive health. And so Now going to single mother by choice. What is single mother by choice? You may have seen the term SMBC. You may have also seen choice mom, all meaning single mother by choice, which is someone who proactively decides to become a mother without a partner, and often through donor conception or adoption. And single mother by circumstances, you may have experienced a separation or lost or made the best decision for yourself and your child in a difficult situation and choosing to go ahead. And so not everyone may come to this path in the same way, but the common thread is we have a deep desire to be a mother, regardless of how we got there. One thing that some people tend to ask me about, what's the difference between a single mom versus a single mother by choice? Aside from doing it with a partner and conceiving it that way, the biggest difference for a single mother by choice is that we've planned for this. We've gone through a lot more thinking and planning in terms of having a child on your own. We've thought about, our finances. We've thought about what our support system might be. There's a lot more decisions made before we choose this path versus a single mom who sometimes is left, has a divorce or separation or loss, and is left by circumstance to figure all of that out now and move forward. So that's one of the biggest difference I tend to tell people, is that we haven't just ended up here. We've made a proactive choice. And then starting to go into sort of the decision making, becoming a single mother by choice, it is one of the biggest decisions you will probably ever make in your life. And there are so many questions that come to mind. And I'm sure for those who have made the decision already, some of these questions might have popped up of, can I really do this on my own? Am I selfish for bringing a child into this world without a father or a partner? Will I be enough? Can I afford it? And all those financial considerations. Do I have the support system? Will I regret it? And unfortunately, so many women delay this decision because they just don't have the support or the information, or even fear the judgment in doing it on their own. And then that often relates in, women seeking this choice in times that are too late. I mean, I've talked to many clinics or tried to partner with many clinics, and the common thing they tell me is, I end up freezing my patients' eggs, and then, or they choose to freeze their eggs, and then they come back years later, and sometimes, they come back too late, or they've done the fertility assessment and they've come back too late, and now they want to have a child, and it's really difficult at the time. So one of the posts, if I recently post about egg freezing, is it's great to freeze your eggs, but the one thing you do need to know when you freeze your eggs is, the chances of an eggs becoming a healthy embryo is still not that high. And just waiting till you're 40 or closer to your 40s to have to freeze your eggs and then have a baby, and to find out those eggs aren't viable, it's much harder to then choose to go through another IVF cycle to gain more eggs. So it's something I would still recommend doing, egg freezing. I plan to freeze my daughter's eggs if she allows me to. But it's still, I would still say, don't wait too long to see what the results of those eggs would be. But going back to making the decision, if you're in this phase, here's something that I could, share with you. There are two things you want to sort of work through when you're making a decision. Understanding your why. By understanding your why, it begins to allow you to understand, what your desires are, your aspirations are. Put pen to paper down and just write what comes to mind when you think, why do I want to be a mom? Visualize yourself as a single mom. How does it look to you? How does it feel to you? Some of you might say, I can't put words to it. It's just this deep feeling that I have, this deep desire that I, have. And I get that. That is a completely normal feeling, as a woman we have. And it just might be an inner calling. And that might just be enough to be your why. And then there's all these fears that potentially could be coming up in making the decision. And again, I would say pen to paper, write down each of these fears. Is it that I'm worried, about the impact of my child, or I'm worried about what others may think, or not having my family support. A lot of the time, our fears are going to come from assumptions we're just making and not necessarily fact. And so, what I would encourage you to do if you're in this phase is write them all out and really ask yourself, is this truly fact, or is this an assumption that I'm assuming that my child won't be okay, or that my parents won't support me, or that the community will judge me? And how important are these things to you, right? Like, a lot of time I get people saying, "Well, I don't know if my family will support me. I don't know, maybe the community, won't support it." And at the end of the day, it's your dream, it's your life. Are you willing to give it all up because of other people and what they think, or the support? There are other ways to gain support, and we can talk. We'll sort of get to that in a moment, but those are sort of the two exercises I would say is know your why, because that's going to help you persevere through this journey, because there will be some tough times, and examine your fears. Analyze, like, go into the write them all out, and then go through and process each one to say, is this true, or is this an assumption I'm just assuming? Any questions on the making decision piece, because it is a big part of the journey. If not, I'll keep going. Okay. So in terms of making a decision, you may find you make the decision and it feels like a very empowering choice, but there might be this feeling of sadness. And you may not, when I made my decision, I was left with the decision of, either I can wait for a partner, or I can choose to be a single mother by choice. I chose to be a single mother by choice. It felt empowering, but I kept feeling this, feeling of sadness inside. And I didn't realize there was still some grief that I was experiencing. I had to grieve, and a lot of women do have to grieve this fairy tale. We've all grown up watching Disney movies, or thinking there's this, happily ever after, or just we've grown up in communities and families where you you go to school, you get married, you have your kid, and now this is not the way you're going to be, creating your family. And so there is that feeling of sadness of times, of that this was not the way you thought this would be. And that's completely normal. You know, this will come up throughout your journey. Um, it's it's come up even when I was pregnant. It's come up when I've had my child. It does not mean I regret my choice. It's just getting over the fact that there wasn't someone doing this with me. But in by no means does that change my feeling in terms of wanting to be a mom or having made this choice. So, what you might be feeling or grieving through this process, and know this is completely normal, is that you may be grieving the fact that you thought you'd have a partner to share it all with, the highs, the lows, the hard, the challenges, everything, right? So, you may be experiencing that piece. You may be grieving the fact that you don't have a father figure for your child. I grew up with a father that I love and respect, and the idea that my child might not have that, that felt scary, and I, there was a bit of sadness for that. But it doesn't mean that I don't surround my child right now with her uncle and her grandfather, and you know male role models that I've set up around her life. So there are ways to substitute the father figure. And also, who knows, there could be love later on, and there could be a father figure that comes. For some, it's community support and acceptance, right? So some of us might be grieving the fact that we won't have the full support of their community. Um, Many people still don't necessarily know that I'm a single mother by choice. It's not something that I have necessarily openly shared, with everyone that I, sort of meet. It's not how I introduce myself. And that's fine. It's not something that I necessarily need, but there are some who need that community support and acceptance, and you may find that you may not get that on your journey. And then finally, the other thing you might be grieving is the time you feel you've lost. So you may have waited to a certain amount of time and felt like I should have started earlier. Had I done this earlier, I would have I'd be pregnant now. I waited too long. This was plan B for me. And so it's just something that you might need to get over. But what I would say in terms of grieving the fairy tale is, how can you look at this in a different way? What could your new happily ever after look like? There's still time for love after this. You can still have your child, have love later, and it doesn't have to be with the same pressure that we have now. So in terms of whether it be, sorry, in terms of it could be later on, and it's sort of without the pressure of that biological clock. So now you're not trying to get into a relationship just so you can have a child. You can choose to be in a relationship, or you can choose not to be. Did I see a comment? Is there a question? What age did I give birth? I gave birth at the age of, I think I just turned 39 when I finally gave birth. So after all of that, I started around 35 with the egg freezing, and then I finally gave birth at 39. Okay, let's keep going. And then knowing your options. So this is another way that can help you make the decision. This was actually how I was able to make my decision so quickly. I truly think, had I not gone through the egg freezing approach, I probably would have waited longer to try and conceive, thinking I would have been fine to conceive. And so the number one thing I tell everyone when they're trying to make this decision, if you're still undecided in terms of whether you should choose this path or not, but you're sort of drawn towards, is get a fertility assessment. Go to your clinic, go to one of the clinics, fertility clinics, do your research in terms of clinics. Not all are the same, but get your fertility assessment. I think, if you're in Canada, it is pretty much covered. There's only one test for your AMH levels that you would be paying for, but otherwise you can find out sort of your situation. And then in terms of your options, there are several options to be considering on this path. So you could be choosing to freeze your eggs to buy you more time, like I did. You could also choose to freeze your embryos, which not necessarily, I know during when I was going through it, not all clinics necessarily freeze embryos, so you might want to just check on that, but some do, or most do. So you could choose to freeze embryos, which, some of you might ask, why would I do freeze my embryos versus freeze my eggs? Well, an embryo, egg freezing, from what I've heard, has a 12% chance per egg to get, to make it to pregnancy, whereas embryos have a much higher chance in terms of turning into a pregnancy. So that would be your option. Then there's the option of trying to conceive. If you wanted to go into conceiving, obviously in terms of the right option for you is something for you to discuss with your doctor, but you would be discussing whether you'd have an intrauterine insemination. It could be unmedicated or medicated. So they would give you, in a medicated round, they would give you Clomid or Letrozole to help stimulate your follicles. And so there's the IUI option, which is less invasive, no injections required. Or there's IVF, which is definitely a more intensive approach, which requires you self-injecting and potentially taking some pills through the process until you get to an egg retrieval, where they retrieve your eggs, put the sperm together, and then you have your potential embryos from that in order to transfer back into you. There's egg donor. So if you feel like your result, fertility assessment was not strong and you don't feel like you can get the eggs needed, you could consider an egg donor. There's surrogacy to consider, and then there's adoption. Now, I can't say much about adoption because I have not gone through it, but I have spoken to some women who have gone through who have tried to go through the adoption route. From what I understand, it can be challenging from the perspective that when the mother is choosing potentially who to, or when couples are choosing to give their baby to, they might be looking for two-parent homes versus a single-parent home. It doesn't mean that it's not possible, but it is what I've heard from one of the women that who was going through the adoption process, that it can be more challenging, but it's not impossible, and something to consider as you go through it. But each option comes with its own considerations and success rates, and this is something I can't, you know, I can't speak to in terms of success rates, but this is a conversation you need to have with your fertility doctor. So speaking about fertility doctors, when you do go into picking your fertility clinic and your doctor, spend the time to find the right, clinic and a place where you feel most comfortable and where you feel like you have access to your doctor and nursing team. So it is quite common for folks to switch clinics after going through a round due to the care they're getting. And so one thing I would highly recommend as you're going through the process is advocate for yourself at every step of the way. Ask questions, get second opinions. Don't be afraid to try and get more information and feel like you are a part of this journey too. The doctors do have a limited amount of time on these calls, and the best thing you can do is show up prepared with your questions and ready to go. Because I will say, during my whole journey, I was told that I had unexplained infertility, but it was only after me asking, hey, I've had 6, unmedicated IUIs that failed. I did 2 IVF cycles. We had a low yield. Am I experiencing infertility? And that's when I was told, actually, yes, it's probably all your numbers look good, everything looks good, but I think, based on this, you're experiencing unexplained infertility. And I feel like had I not asked the question, I may not have gotten that, found that out. So one thing for sure, make sure you feel comfortable at the clinic, make sure you feel like you have access to your doctor, your nursing team, and ask the question so you feel comfortable. Picking your sperm donor. So after you've made the biggest decision of your life of becoming a single mother by choice, the second biggest decision you'll make is probably who should the sperm donor be. And so there are several types of donors that you can select from. So starting with the donor selection, you could have a known donor. You could have an anonymous donor from the sperm bank. You could have an open ID donor, which it means they agree to a future contact with your child at 18. Or you can have an ID disclosure donor. And this, for everyone has their own preference. There is no right or wrong decision. All I will say in terms of a known donor, from what I understand, if you are choosing a known donor, you do want to consider getting some legal advice during that process in terms of contracting and setting up, that contract with your donor. The other thing to note with known donor, if you're in Canada, is that if you wanted a sample from your known donor, you would have them come to the clinic, they would provide their sample, but Health Canada, for some reason, does not allow you to use that donor sperm sample for another 6 months after. So if you were like me and really wanted to get going, 6 months sounded too long for me, and known donor did not become an option for me. In terms of the anonymous versus open donor, that's very much a personal decision. There's no right or wrong in terms of what you feel is right. Initially, I thought I would go with an anonymous donor. I really thought, that was the right choice for me. And I realized in my decision making that was, for me, coming from a place of fear. I was worried that my child would be, disappointed with the choice that I made, or disappointed if they met the donor. And so in order to sort of prevent that, I was thinking anonymous donor, but in the end, I ended up going with an ID disclosure donor because I wanted my child to have that option to contact the donor or not. I didn't want to take that away from my child. So it is a big decision to make. You just got to do what feels right for you. It is very much a personal decision. In terms of, going to the sperm bank and picking your donor, here's sort of the process that I sort of give people. First start by identifying what are your non-negotiables. So for me, it was, open donor, had to be CMV compatible. I wanted them to have the genetic profile, genetic testing of the 256 tests done to compare it to my own genetic testing so that I wouldn't be passing on anything to my child. I honestly thought I was having a boy, and so I wanted a donor that was tall. In the end, I had a girl. But there might be some characteristics that you may want. You may want from certain backgrounds. Education might be important. So first, you want to just start by listing your criteria. For me, essay was also really important, that they had a well-written essay that I could share with my child, so I could be like, this is who they are and why I chose them. So first start by listing your criteria. Know that sperm banks they will present the information differently and sometimes have different information. So I know some sperm banks may only have the child photo, whereas other sperm banks will have the child and the adult photo, or some will only have the adult photo and not the child. So you want to just make sure that you're looking across different sperm banks to see which information is important for you, and then begin browsing the profiles. Look, set your criteria into the filters and see what pops out. I probably overthought my sperm donor thinking process. It took me, I looked through many profiles because I was, thinking, oh, maybe a better profile will come online today, or maybe the one will come online. And I think I kind of realized there's no sort of perfect donor, but there is one that sort of sticks with you. So as you go through filtering, you'll find, I had several criteria in the beginning, and then I realized it was really just 3 or 4 things that I wanted my donor to have, and the rest was not as important. And so begin to narrow down your what's it called, your criteria, so that you can bring it down to your top 3 to 5 donors. And then the final way that I usually give the advice on picking that one donor is, imagine you had this profile in front of you and you were sharing it with your child. How would you explain it? What would you call out about their profile? Taking yourself through that process will help you nail down sort of, okay, this is the one I'm leaning towards, because this is the one that I can easily explain in terms of whether it's their background, essay, what they wrote, their why. I mean, my donor was a donor because his sister struggled with getting pregnant, and I thought and he decided he wanted to also support couples in getting pregnant. So I really liked that reason. Some will blatantly tell you that they're doing it for the money in their essay, and some will, say many things in their essay, and some will say very little. So again, this is a very personal choice. It seems like an overwhelming decision, but I would say take the time to make your choice. Try to start with your criteria. You may have a lot in the beginning, and then come down to what is it that's really important to you. Bring it down to your 3 to 5 profiles, and then just imagine yourself sharing this with your child. Any questions on picking the donor, or anything anyone is struggling with that I can potentially help answer if I haven't already? No? Okay. I will keep going. Now moving to the trying to conceive. So I feel like every mother will face a season of struggle at some point. For me, it was definitely trying to conceive. And I think it is for many of us single mother by choice, because we choose this path later than most women do, right? Like, we are potentially waiting later in life, past our mid-30s or mid-30s onwards. And so we are finding it harder to conceive than women who have found a partner and started to conceive. Trying to conceive is an emotional roller coaster, with the tracking, the waiting, the testing, potentially injecting yourself solo. It is up and down, and it can be, some can get pregnant really quickly, but for those who struggle through it, it can become increasingly difficult to talk about the process with your friends or family. It can feel like nobody understands what you're going through because no one had to go through it alone the way you had. It can feel, I remember feeling, exhausted, depressed, and it was just hard to find joy. I mean, after 6 rounds, the first few rounds, I was like, okay, next round's the one, next round's the one, next round's the one. And then as you get closer to, it was round 6 for me for IUI, I knew IVF was coming down the pipe, and that was tough. And so keeping your spirits high, keeping the joy still in your days is really tough. So in terms of staying the course, through all these setbacks, the one thing I'll say is come back to that why. One of the things I did was write a letter to my future baby, or you can write it to yourself, just reminding me why I'm on this path. Sometimes just writing these things out, sometimes journaling can really just help take our emotions out onto the page and just remind us, why are we doing what we're doing? I will take the question. Yeah. Oh, talk about donor siblings. Something I'm struggling with is that my child could potentially have several genetic half siblings out there. Yeah, so I have so in the when you get pregnant, you will potentially go back onto your sperm bank site and register that you got pregnant with donor so and so. They would know which donor because you bought the vials from them, and then you would get access to potentially other mothers that have chosen the path of or have chosen the same donor. In terms of donor siblings, it is up to you whether to decide how you want to bring this up with your child. For me, I will sort of bring this in as I bring in the story of, her father, in terms of when she can finally understand it. So initially the conversations when she's young, typically this is around 3, they say 4 or 5, they start to ask, who's my dad? And that's when just to give you a little context to help you with that part too, one of the things I got a counseling session around for that is how to talk to your child about it. And so the way I plan to start talking to my child about it is, telling them a very nice man, donated his seed so that mom could get pregnant because she really wanted to be a mom. She really wanted to have you as my child. And so they gave their seed to the doctor, and mom was able to make a baby from that. And so those are sort of the starting conversations, and as they get to understand more and more, they might ask, well, where is he, who is he? And you can start to bring in the profile, maybe pictures to show who the person is. But in terms of siblings, you know there is options. I guess if you're worried about too many, there are sperm banks that have a limited amount of sperm vials they give out so that there would be a limited amount of children being born. So those are, I know in the Zytex one, it is called limited donor, limited something. To me, they are half genetic siblings out there, but it's really up to you how you want to present it. And so for me, I don't plan on presenting it until the question comes up, um, or not till the question, till she can understand that this person is a donor, that they do have other children, that there are other half siblings out there. And I will leave it up to them at that point to decide, do they want to get in touch or not? But again, you can decide how that looks for your child. I mean, some people don't necessarily provide all the information. Some people leave it completely open. I know of family or mothers who have said, here's your donor. Do you want more information? No, that's okay, mom. You're my mom, and that's all I need, and that's all I know. And so some may want to have more questions, and some may not have any questions. And I think that's for you to navigate as you see fit and right for your child. That may not answer your question, Zoe, but hopefully that helps a little bit. Okay, so coming back to your why is the one thing. And then finding ways, if I think about other things to consider when you're going through conceiving alone, is finding ways to bring joy back into your life. One way is to do things that brought you joy when you were a child. So for me, I was actually trying to conceive during COVID, which is obviously the worst time to be trying to conceive because you already are, can't see any friends or get out. So you're already isolated, and then you're feeling isolated because you're in this process. But for me, it was doing puzzles, painting. I went back to things that I used to love doing as a child, and it's just the little things as you're going through the process that can help make things a little bit easier. So that would be my other thing, is when you're trying to conceive and things get hard, try to find ways to bring joy back. And then the last one is surrender. I had to learn the hard way, but letting go and learning that you're not in control, that you can't control the outcome no matter how hard you tried. And I tried everything: acupuncture, traditional Chinese medicine, legs up, all the exercises, the right foods, naturopaths, nutritionists, Ayurvedic, like you name it, I tried it to get pregnant. And, at the end of the day, my lesson to learn was to let go and just not focus on the outcome. My biggest line at the end was, I'm going to keep going until the doctors tell me I can't, and then I'm going to find a doctor that says I can. So I wasn't stuck to the outcome. I was like, okay, if this John doesn't work, I'm going to go again. And not that I could continue to afford to do that, but it was just the mentality of just, it's okay if this one doesn't work, and not putting so much stress and focus that this has to be the round, because that's when you're not creating an environment for a baby to come into that, right? So everyone is struggling and has a lesson to learn, whether it be through the trying to conceive phase, whether it be in your pregnancy phase, or whether it be as an early mom. You got to just ask yourself, what is the lesson for me? What am I supposed to learn from this hardship? And for me, it was letting go, because once the baby would come and I'd have the child, I wouldn't have control of a lot of things. And I haven't had control of a lot of things. Um, so that's something that I would just remember, is when you're struggling, ask yourself, what's the lesson? Moving into pregnancy. So pregnancy, for me, it was a great time. After going through what I'd gone through, I was in this super grateful mode. I was happy every day. There was no drama of a partner. There was no expectation. So the nice thing about being pregnant, I think, in some ways, is yes, we don't have the partner, but there was no arguing. There was no these angry moments or any of that. Like, it was just a time of pure joy for me. But one thing that can be, and was a bit of a struggle for me, I'm a big introvert, very private, even though I've started Choice Mom Coach for the purpose to help women. But I wasn't someone that shared, news openly. I wasn't on social media. I wasn't on any of those things. So deciding how I was going to share the news was something that I, took some time to figure out. And for those, for some of you, it's just easy. You go and you share what I'm pregnant, excited, all that stuff. But for some of you, it might be a hard thing to share. And just to give you a little bit of help, if you are one of those people, I took my line from Mindy Kaling. She's also a famous actress, producer. She had now 3 kids, a single mother by choice. And I was so curious, how was she able to get this far without sharing who the father is, being in the limelight? And I one time found her interview of someone asking about who the father was, and I really loved her line. She said, um, in terms of who the father is, that's something I want to share with my daughter before I share with the world, which I thought was a great way to shut down the conversation to say, who, what, where, when, how. I get you want to know, but I want to share that first with my child before I share it with the world, which I loved. And that's sort of the line I used is when I shared the news with folks that I didn't want to get into too much of the details with, I said, I had a challenging journey, but I'm so excited to share that I'm pregnant. And in terms of, the who, what, where, when, how, that's something I want to share with my child before I share with everyone else. And then everyone was just super happy about it, right? So if you're looking to kind of find a way to share it more privately, that is one of the ways. But if you're ready to just share, I got pregnant, donor, whatever, share it. And then in terms of celebrating the journey, sometimes I hear single mothers by choice saying they may not do all the celebrations that couples would do. But I would say do a baby moon, do the maternity shoot, do the gender reveal. Having those moments captured. I have pictures of my baby moon when I went with my family, my parents, my brother, my sister-in-law. We went to the Bahamas and we had my little baby moon. I did this is one of my maternity shoot shots. I went all out with the maternity shoot, and then even the gender reveal with my family, I did that as well. So just because your journey may not look like how you imagine, don't forget to celebrate the moments. And then in the pregnancy phase is a good time to start thinking about building your village if you haven't already. So who is the village you want to surround your child with, whether it be family, friends? Do you want a doula during for your labor and delivery? I had one. I thought it was a huge help. My mother was with me too, but a doula was super helpful in the process. I also wanted to have a natural delivery. I didn't want to do the epidural, so even more reason to have a doula. But you just want to figure out which allied healthcare professionals, acupuncturist, you need TCM. I did chiropractor during my pregnancy to help adjust my spine so that the baby would sort of come through more easily. There's physio you can do. What kind of hired support will you need during, on your journey? Are there other solo moms you could, reach out during your journey? So start to think about that village you're going to need as you're pregnant. And just because you're pregnant solo doesn't mean you have to go through it and feel unsupported. There is definitely a community of us single mothers by choice online. And you have your family, friends, and also hired support if needed. The other thing about pregnancy is a really good time to start preparing for baby. Once you kind of get over the hurdle of trying to conceive, it's a good time to start educating yourself in terms of learning all the new baby care, especially if you're planning to go back to work sooner. So luckily for us in Canada, we have the year maternity leave, but for some of us who have our own business, we get a very short period. I only took 2.5 months off, and then I went back to work, not full time, but part time. And so getting her sleep down, getting her routine down, getting her transition to a bottle was incredibly important to me and something that I really, I'd say, studied for, or, watched all the courses on, or all the things on YouTube, or got courses on, because that is something that I needed to do. I needed to provide, and I needed to get back to work. And so those are the things you want to start educating yourself throughout your pregnancy, is just new baby care, because you are in a bit of a different situation given you don't have the partner or this extra set of hands. I did also move in, or my mom moved in with me for the first month to just help me manage the first weeks with the baby. So having that extra support in the first weeks is crucial, whether it's friends bringing over food, whether you're getting hired help, whether you're getting sleep consultant, or breastfeeding support. All of those things should be considered. And then financial readiness, looking at your maternity plan, starting to look at a budget, looking at your savings, looking at your childcare options in Canada, or at least in Toronto. You definitely want to put your name on the list as soon as you know you're pregnant, and sometimes even before you're going to be pregnant in terms of daycare. It is not easy to necessarily get daycare options. But you want to start thinking about savings and how much, savings for a rainy day. You want to think about how are you going to put, will you want life insurance, getting a will together, budgeting, you can find out what your budget is. Now thinking about diapers, formula, baby clothes, the initial budget you'll need to set up your nursery. Financial readiness is super important and something to start working through even before you get pregnant, in terms of how you're going to support you and your child. And then preparing for your home, setting up the nursery, baby essentials, planning your sort of logistics in advance, all of that is super important, as you are going through the pregnancy phase. I see we have a question, I think. Oh, yes, great SMBC community. Okay, and then my last slide here on life as a solo mom. So the best parts of being a solo mom is that you get to do everything your way. There, you get to name the baby, you get to pass down the values you want, you get to keep your own traditions, you get to choose which holiday you want to spend where. There is no compromising, there's no negotiating. It is all your way. You get to see the milestones, you get the first laugh, the first words, the first steps, and there is this deep sense of pride and empowerment. I know Mother's Day is a hard day for those who are struggling and figuring this out. But on the other side of being a solo mom, it is also a different experience for me in terms of being a mom, because I chose this path, I fought for this path, and now I have, my daughter made me a mother. And to me, Mother's Day is more about just gratitude. I don't necessarily need to be celebrated or feel the need to be celebrated. I am just grateful for the title and that she made me a mom. And then in terms of the hard part, so not something we always talk about, but the thing I was most surprised with as a solo mom, I thought I'd be physically exhausted from lack of sleep and just doing it all. And it was really the mental exhaustion of carrying the full load of figuring out, keeping track of my work, keeping track of their day, what are, the 3 meals a day, because I could eat cereal for dinner if I needed to, but that's not something I could feed my child. Just managing, daycare lists, wills, like there's just so much to keep track of in a given day, and it just never feels like enough time. So I thought I'd be exhausted from physical aspects of it, but there is this mental aspect of trying to keep it all and not being able to pass that off to someone else. The other thing is there's no one to pass off the baby to at 3 a.m. There's no sleeping in. There are times where I am sick. I'm still kind of sick right now, and I would love to just sleep longer or say, "Hey, can you go get her?" There is not, yes, I could have my parents come and support me, but the impromptu sort of 3 a.m.s or no, the sleep-ins, you don't get those as a single mother by choice. And then the worst is when you're both sick. When you're both sick, it is the hardest because again, there's just no break. You've got to push through unless you can have family come over and help out, which, you will have friends and family come in, but it is hard when you're sick, you need to rest, you're cranky, they're cranky, they're crying over every little thing, and you're just trying to get through the day. It is one of the hardest things of being a single mother by choice. And then just there will be times of just balancing and surviving, of just running the household, earning the income, you know, trying to have a social life, which is definitely hard. It's definitely the least on my list of priorities. Dating is the last thing I could even think of just from a mental capacity. It doesn't mean that I don't want to. It's just I haven't prioritized those things now. Right now, for me, it's her, it's work. And that's really it. But those would be the hardest parts of being a single mother by choice. But in the end, my only regret is that I didn't make this decision sooner. I I am so happy I chose this path. For most, I haven't met any single mother by choice yet, or maybe they haven't shared it, that has regretted their decision. Everyone truly, it is, if you really want to be a mom, I'd say don't wait too long. And that's it. That's all I had for today. Feel free. I put both of our contact information for Fertility Friends or my contact information. But if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to stick around and answer any questions you may have. Oh, good. I'm glad. You're welcome. Any questions at all about solo motherhood, trying to conceive, any of it? No question is too little. And I'm happy to answer anything that you're sort of struggling with at the moment. Because as Isabel said, no woman should have to go through this process alone.
And I think the message is there that you won't let them.
Oh, good. Genetic testing, sure. So if you haven't already picked your donor, if you have picked your donor, there are donors that go through the genetic testing where they can get 256 sort of genetic disorders sort of tested through a saliva test when they're putting in their sperm. And you can also get that same genetic test done as well. And so the reason why it's good to have that is that you can see what the donor has, and you can see what you have, and then decide, okay, if you overlap on any of those genetic disorders, you may choose not to go with that donor because it just increases the likelihood that your child will receive that same disorder. And so when I was choosing, everyone will have something, or most people will have one or two or three. And you're just looking to see, based on your own profile and their profile, are there anything in common so that you can make a more informative choice and reduce the chances of passing that on to your child. No problem.
Hi, my name
Yeah,
is Chaya, and I actually did have a quick question. I
sure.
was wondering if there's any challenges that you encountered in terms of telling your family or people around you, just any cultural expectations that you had
Yeah.
to kind of come up against.
Yeah, sure. So I actually didn't go into that too much, but yes. So when I told my parents the first time, it was before I'd even sort of gone through the egg freezing phase. It sort of always had been in the back of my mind, if I didn't get married or if I didn't find a partner, I wasn't going to get married just to have a child. And my parents had an arranged marriage, and so that was even more reason for me not to want to choose, just to have a relationship, just to have kids. And so I flippantly kind of said it to my parents on a vacation one time of like, hey, if I don't find a partner, I'm just going to do it myself. And the reaction was not great at all. They were not supportive of it. They didn't, my brother said he thought I was being selfish. My mom was like, we won't know we won't know any of the genetics. We won't know who the father is. They were not. And my dad just kept silent, which means he's letting my mom take care of this. He's not going to say anything, but he's not in support of it. And what I found later on, as they saw me go through the egg freezing process and they saw how disappointed I was that I couldn't buy more time, they sort of started to come around to the idea of me choosing this path. But what I will say is the mistake I made was not being informed when sharing the information with my parents. The thing I tell women is if you're going to share the information, if you're going to tell them you're going to choose this path, you want to be as informed as possible so that you are confident in your decision or you're feeling confident. So, when I came back to the conversation with my mom about sperm donor, she sort of said, well, why don't you just have a one night stand, which is a crazy thing for an Indian mother to say. But she said, at least we'll know who the father is. And I was like, we won't know anything about the father. I will know much more about the father through through the sperm donor. I'll know actually more than you knew about my dad through the sperm donor profile. I'll know about his medical history. I'll know about his family's medical history, things you didn't know about even for when you got married. And so part of it is also, if you do decide to share it with your family, go on sperm banks, understand, what kind of information you'll be bringing forward, feel confident about the choice that you're making. Because yes, you got to understand your parents, your family is going to respond in a place of fear. This is still not necessarily the norm, and they're worried for you. They're worried that, this isn't what they envisioned for you. They're worried that this isn't, this is going to be hard for you. And so they'll start projecting that and putting that forward. But if you can come from a place of not being defensive about it, understand that they are also processing the decision and the choices you're making, it will make it a little bit easier. But yes, there is definitely it is definitely not the norm for my family, that I chose this path, but they came around to it because they saw me struggle so much in trying to buy more time. They knew I really wanted to be a mom, and they accepted this decision. And now, I mean, she is the love of their lives. Like, my parents are over the moon. She is the first grandchild. They are over the moon with her. And they couldn't care less, how this all came about.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Reema, for this wonderful presentation. I'm quite sure that it was very helpful to all the participants, and we will send an email tomorrow with the recording of this session to all the people who registered to the webinar. So for you who watched it, you can still rewatch it if you want. You can share it with other people who you feel would benefit from it, and I think we can call it a night. But thank you so much, Reema. It was a wonderful presentation. And thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you. Thank you,
Have
guys.
a good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.